I never believed my grandfather's stories until I stood alone in his cabin, holding the urn that contained all that remained of him. The dense Pacific Northwest rain drummed against the roof, like 1,000 whispered warnings, and his final words circled endlessly through my mind. "Promise me you'll listen to the forest," he'd said, gripping my hand with unexpected strength just hours before he died. The one who spoke like us but wasn't "He'll know I'm gone." At the time, I dismissed it as morphine-induced delirium, the confused ramblings of a mind slipping away. But standing there surrounded by his belongings, I felt the weight of something unfinished pressing against my chest. The cabin smelled of cedar and old tobacco, unchanged since my childhood visits, yet everything seemed different now. Photographs of him alone in these woods lined the walls, and in each one, I swear his eyes were looking just beyond the camera, towards something I'd never noticed before. The forest outside waited in cathedral silence, ancient and patient. I'd planned a simple hike to his favorite spot, scatter his ashes by the creek, and return to my ordinary life in the city. But as I zipped my jacket and stepped onto the covered porch, the mist between those towering trees seemed to shift with intention. Something out there had been expecting me. I wasn't ready for what keeping a dead man's promise would cost, or what it would reveal. The trail disappeared into mist within minutes, the ancient cedars closing around me like the walls of some primordial temple. I clutched my grandfather's urn against my chest, following the path he'd walked countless times, when I heard it, a voice, deep and resonant, speaking words that made my blood freeze. Not the sounds of the forest, but actual language, rolling through the fog with deliberate pronunciation. "In solitude, where we are least alone, Byron." Someone was reciting Byron in the middle of nowhere. I stopped breathing, every rational thought screaming that hikers sometimes read aloud, that someone else was out here enjoying poetry. But the voice carried a strange weight, each syllable formed with careful precision, as if the speaker were tasting the words, testing them. It echoed from deeper in the trees, where the mist hung thick as wool, and I found myself following it without deciding to. My grandfather's final words pulsed behind my eyes. "The one who spoke like us but wasn't," the voice continued, shifting to Shakespeare now, then Frost, reciting the road not taken with an aching slowness that felt like prayer. There was something rehearsed about it, something practiced, not a hiker enjoying literature, but a student of humanity learning our language like sacred text. My hands trembled as I pushed through sword ferns taller than my waist, drawn forward by equal parts terror and inexplicable recognition. Then the words stopped, replaced by silence so complete it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Through the clearing mist ahead, I saw the stream my grandfather loved, and beside it, something stood waiting, massive and impossible, its shape wrong for anything I'd ever known. The figure stood at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb the mist rather than reflect it. But what stopped my heart wasn't its size, it was the posture. It stood with one hand gesturing outward, palm up, as if addressing an invisible audience. The other hand touched its chest in a manner so achingly human it felt like watching something sacred and forbidden. When it spoke again, testing different inflections of the same phrase, I realized I was witnessing practice, rehearsal, the private moments of a being learning to mirror us. My grandfather's words suddenly made terrible, beautiful sense. This wasn't an animal or a monster from campfire stories. This was someone who had spent lifetimes at the edge of our world, studying us the way we study distant stars with longing, an unbridgeable distance. The creature shifted its weight, rolling its massive shoulders, then tried the Byron line again with different emphasis, as if searching for the emotional truth beneath the syntax. I must have made some sound, some involuntary gasp, because the figure stopped mid-gesture and turned toward me. Its face emerged from shadow, broad and weathered, with eyes that held an intelligence so profound I felt naked before it. Those eyes studied me, without surprise, as if it had known I was there all along, waiting to see if I would flee or stay. We stood frozen in mutual recognition, predator and prey, uncertain which of us was which, while the mist curled between us like a veil between worlds, barely touching. The creature's voice came soft, deliberate, each word placed with ceremonial care. Your breathing changed when you recognized the Byron. Fear became wonder in 3 heartbeats. It moved closer, not threatening but tentative, the way one approaches a wild bird that might flee. The cedar-scented air thickened between us as it lowered itself onto a moss-covered log, reducing its height, making itself somehow smaller. I have watched your kind name things I cannot name, speak of loneliness while surrounded by millions. I found my voice, trembling but present. How long have you been watching? The question felt absurdly inadequate for the enormity before me. It tilted its head, a gesture heartbreakingly familiar, and I saw my grandfather in that movement, the same contemplative pause before speaking truth. Generations of your people, but only one ever sat with me like you're about to do. Its eyes held mine with an invitation and a test. I sat, legs unsteady, on the damp earth facing this impossibility. It began speaking of time differently than we measure it, not in years, but in bird migrations, salmon runs, the slow death of ancient trees. Your grandfather understood that some conversations exist only in the spaces between your recorded world. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward with implications I was only beginning to grasp. He called me friend, not specimen, it continued, and something in that massive chest shifted a breath, a suppressed sob. I couldn't tell. The mist swirled patterns between us that felt like language older than words. I reached slowly for my phone, thinking of proof, of belief, of the world that would never accept this without evidence. The creature's eyes followed my hand with an expression I would only later recognize as hope's. Opposite, my thumb found the record button with practiced ease. The phone concealed against my thigh, lens aimed upward through calculated carelessness. The creature continued speaking, its voice painting memories I desperately needed preserved. My grandfather bringing coffee in a battered thermos, reading Whitman aloud beneath November rain, sitting in companionable silence while seasons turned. Each word was a treasure I told myself the world deserved to hear. Even as something cold and serpentine coiled in my chest, he told me about your mother's laugh, how it reminded him of creek water over stones. The Sasquatch said, and I watched its massive hands gesture with impossible delicacy, sculpting meaning in the air. The phone felt heavier with each passing second, a stone growing denser in my palm. I rationalized frantically this was history. This was science. This was too important to exist only in my fallible memory. But beneath the justifications, a darker truth. I wanted to be believed more than I wanted to be worthy of belief. The creature leaned forward, and I caught the scent of pine, sap and ancient earth, something utterly foreign yet intimate as childhood. Your grandfather said humans are loneliest when surrounded by their own kind, that you've built towers of glass to avoid touching. Its eyes caught mine with devastating clarity, and I felt the phone burning against my leg like a brand. The weight of what I was stealing grew unbearable, yet I couldn't stop recording. Then its gaze dropped, following some instinct older than deception, and fixed upon the lens glinting between my fingers like a betrayer's coin. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was the sound of something sacred breaking, a crystalline fracture spreading through the air between us. The creature's eyes, which had held warmth like embers in darkness, transformed into wells of such profound sorrow that I felt my own humanity shrivel beneath their weight. It didn't roar or threaten. Instead, its massive shoulders sagged as though centuries of hope had just died in this single moment. I watched recognition dawn across its features, not surprise, but the tired confirmation of an expected wound. Your grandfather wept the first time we spoke, it said, voice now hollow as wind through empty caves. He wept because he understood what I was offering, and what it would cost him to accept a friendship built entirely on faith, with no proof to armor him against doubt. The creature's hand rose slowly, one clawed finger pointing at my phone with the gentleness of identifying a tumor. He chose trust over evidence, presence over possession, and in 43 years never once betrayed that choice, though it meant carrying a secret that made him seem half mad to those he loved. The Sasquatch's breathing changed, becoming ragged, unmistakably human in its brokenness. A sound escaped its throat, not animal, but the choked sob of someone who'd been foolish enough to hope again, to believe that loneliness might end twice in one lifetime. I saw tears carve paths through the ancient dirt on its face, and the sight destroyed something fundamental in my chest. He believed I was worth the cost of his isolation. The creature continued, its voice fracturing like ice under spring sun. Every hunter's mockery, every neighbor's sideways glance, every moment his own children looked at him with worry, he bore it all silently because our friendship existed in a realm more real than validation. The massive being took one step backward, and I felt the distance between us expand into something unbridgeable. I told myself his blood might carry the same capacity for faith, that perhaps loneliness had made me foolish enough to reach across generations. The creature's hand moved to its chest, pressing against its heart with such recognizable human grief that I dropped the phone entirely. Your kind has forgotten that the most profound truths cannot survive documentation, it whispered, eyes fixed on where my device lay in the moss. The moment you make something provable, you murder its sacredness, you transform living mystery into dead evidence, wonder into commodity. Its breathing grew more labored, each exhale carrying sounds I'd heard at funerals, beside hospital beds, in moments when love becomes loss. Your grandfather's final gift was protecting me from this exact betrayal, it said, voice barely audible now, backing toward the tree line. He took the loneliness of an unbelieved truth to his grave so I might remain free in shadow, unpinned by your world's hungry lenses. The creature's face contorted with such raw anguish that I tasted bile, understanding too late what I'd sacrificed for proof that would never satisfy the hollowness now opening inside me. The journal was wedged behind a loose hearthstone, exactly where loneliness would hide its secrets, my grandfather's. Handwriting trembled across pages dated back 40 years, each entry a confession he could never voice. Today Samuel spoke of his people's extinction, how silence became their only armor against our need to capture everything we don't understand. One passage read, I promised him the friendship of emptiness, no photographs, no recordings, only my word dissolving into forest air when I die. My hands shook so violently the pages blurred, but I forced myself to read every entry, every description of their meetings by the stream. He'd brought books for Samuel to study, explaining human poetry and philosophy during decades of patient visits. He asked me today if loneliness is the price of existing between categories, my grandfather wrote near the end. I didn't have the heart to tell him I've been paying that same price since our first conversation, watching my family doubt my sanity rather than violate his trust. The final entry was dated 3 days before his death, written in barely legible scrawl that spoke of failing strength. If whoever finds this journal is blood of mine, know that I died rich in ways no inheritance can transfer. He'd written, I knew wonder without possession, friendship without proof, and I chose his freedom over my validation every single day. I pressed the journal to my chest and wept, finally understanding that my grandfather's last words weren't a warning, but an invitation, and I'd arrived with handcuffs instead of open palms. The phone lay on the cabin table like an accusation, its screen reflecting my guilt-stricken face back at me. I opened the video file with trembling fingers, desperate for redemption or damnation, needing to know what my betrayal had captured. The footage played in fractured static, Samuel's voice reduced to digital corruption, his form dissolving into pixelated ghosts that technology refused to hold. Then one frame froze clear, only ancient cedars standing sentinel where he'd been, the clearing empty as if our entire conversation had been absorbed back into myth. I watched that single frame for hours, searching for evidence of manipulation or malfunction, but found only truth in the absence. The forest had reclaimed what was never meant to be translated into data, protecting Samuel with the same fierce loyalty my grandfather had shown. Technology, for all its power to capture reality, couldn't hold something that existed in the space between worlds, in the grammar of trust rather than proof. The corruption wasn't a failure, it was an answer. The universe itself honoring boundaries I'd been too desperate to respect. My finger hovered over the delete button, and for a moment I hesitated, feeling the modern hunger to preserve, to possess, to prove. But then I saw my grandfather's handwriting in my mind, his choice of wonder over validation echoing through 40 years of silence. I pressed delete and felt something break open inside me, not loss, but liberation from the tyranny of evidence. The file vanished, taking with it my last claim to certainty, leaving only the weight of experience that no one else would ever have to believe. I returned to the clearing at dawn without my phone, without my camera, without any tools of capture, carrying only the weight of my grandfather's journal and a thermos of coffee for two. The forest felt different in my emptiness, more willing to let me pass, as if the trees themselves recognized the shift from taking to offering. I sat on the same fallen cedar where Samuel had stood, and I waited in the kind of silence my generation has forgotten how to hold, the silence that listens rather than fills. Hours dissolved into bird calls and shifting light, and I didn't check the time because I'd left my watch behind too, learning finally that some encounters can't be scheduled or summoned. The loneliness was profound but clean, a meditation on faith without promise of reward, on showing up for connection that might never come again. I spoke aloud to the morning mist about my grandfather, about regret, about how betrayal teaches us the true cost of sacred things. Samuel never appeared, and somehow that absence became its own kind of communion. Proof that respect sometimes looks like unanswered presence. I returned every morning for a week, then a month, building a practice of witness without expectation, of relationship without possession. The forest began revealing smaller mysteries, tracks that vanished mid-stride, branches arranged in patterns too deliberate for wind, the sensation of being seen by something choosing to remain hidden. On the final morning before I left, I found a single river stone placed on my grandfather's journal, smooth, ancient, deliberately chosen. No creature emerged to claim the gesture, but I understood the language perfectly. Acknowledgement across the unbridgeable distance. Forgiveness rendered in silence. The quiet confirmation that some friendships survive even our worst mistakes. If we're willing to learn what love looks like without proof, would you have chosen faith over evidence? Subscribe to hear more stories from the spaces between worlds.